Okay, firstly, I'm deeply privileged to see you all out here on a Monday morning. A lot of you travel an awful long distance, so I'm going to talk to everybody afterwards. I just want to tell you what I'm doing. I'm going to read what I want to say. It's behind me. It's the Killarney Declaration. You can sign it if you feel like signing it afterwards. It's online as we speak at 1215tribes.com, and you can sign it electronically as well. Hopefully people will start signing it all over the world when they hear what the content of the declaration is. That's the plan. So you're live actors in a moment, an important moment. This isn't just a speech, it's an actual signing of a declaration, which means a lot to us as West, you know. The ancient Irish people who predate this state by centuries and who have long asserted our rights to freedom from tyranny do so again. We declare the right of the Irish people to the unfettered control of Irish destinies, to be sovereign and indefeasible. We, the Irish people, demand our legal endowment of the 1987 Supreme Court Crotty ruling to a national referendum on the continuing membership of the World Health Organization. We do so because the WHO intends to force a Trojan horse treaty upon us disguised as a new agreement and a complete overhaul of all regulations. We demand, in the first instance, that the Irish government rejects these manoeuvres as a breach of WHO membership rules, and which require a 4-month window before any changes are adopted. But we see through and beyond the agency of the WHO to a multi-front agenda determined to create a bio-digital technocracy which threatens to subvert all liberal democracies. And so we reach out from here, at home and abroad, to all those now awakening to the real and present danger from it. Whispered through the sound of silence during the lockdowns is a stark warning about the banality of evil from Hannah Arendt, who studied the Eichmann trial in Jerusalem in the early 1960s, and who predicted that 21st century totalitarianism would be led not by the monsters of the last one, but by the banal bureaucrats of the next. So, we recognize and applaud the intervention of all US Republican senators to demand a Senate vote on the WHO plan to subvert US democracy, the rejection of it by large numbers of state attorney generals, and the determination of state legislatures led by Louisiana to reject the WHO, the UN, and the World Economic Forum. We recognise the intentions of the UK, Netherlands, and the Slovak Republic governments to reject the WHO, and we note that these events occur as the first major vaccine is pulled from human health due to the clotting of our human blood. We muster here outside this globalist summit to remind its participants of our sovereign rights and personal freedom, to say to them, we see you. We see the psychological assault and abuse from advanced military-grade propaganda across the media that crushed informed consent, targeted, delicensed, and deplatformed scientific dissent, together with government lockdowns and fiats, which compelled over 5.5 billion people to be injected with experimental substances, while inexpensive repurposed medicines were denigrated. We see you. We see the preparation, the lowering of the bar on defining what a pandemic was in 2009 by dropping high mortality and high morbidity. We see the abandonment of established science on coronaviruses in favour of inflicting ever more damaging lockdowns. We see the redefinition of the term vaccine itself to no longer include stopping infection and transmission. We see the rising evidence everywhere of excess deaths, disablement, and harm caused to the human immune system. Infertility, stage 4 turbo cancers, myocarditis, autoimmune disease, and death by clotting. We see in the WHO plans for a doubling down, for the reintroduction of discredited PCR test cycles, but this time to be used in human wastewater to find pathogens, list them as national assets, enhance them in gain-of-function bioweapon laboratories to partner the pharmaceutical manufacturers in a repeat of the same model as the Wuhan Institute of Virology, which clearly birthed COVID-19. We see and we recognise the emblems of control and compliance, the ineffective masks, face masks, the social distancing, the abandonment of our elderly to lonely deaths, and the alienation of the Irish people from our ancient rights of grieving. We see you. We see the instrument of control revealed as you now attempt to double down, ensnaring freedom further through digital ID surveillance passports that will hold vaccine records. It will hold personal carbon limits, and it will hold spending restrictions controlled by remotely programmable central bank digital currency. We know these controls are being discussed at this Globalist summit here over the next few days. We see the captivity of social media platforms and search engines to thwart dissenters and send a cold chill through people, splintered and divided by the propaganda from the cheerleaders who led the vilification and demonization of those who failed to comply. We see the intention to roll out an assembly line of unilateral emergency declarations by the WHO Director General to repeat the abuse, to control and demoralize the human population. He speaks here tomorrow, giving a keynote address. We see you. We call on all Irish men and women engaged directly and indirectly, knowingly or unknowingly, in the silence of this fading Irish political establishment. And we call on those engaged at editorial level that led to the abandonment of the Irish people by the fourth estate, the old media. We call upon you to turn away from your masters and their captive fact-checkers and turn instead towards the Irish people. We see you through the wider agenda, your attempts to subvert the bonds of homogenous society and family itself, the flooding of Ireland through unrestricted refugees advanced by the UN, the attempt to redefine family itself, rejected so emphatically by the Irish people. The proposal to restrict free speech through so-called hate speech laws, and the distorted sexualization and misgendering of our young children through UN education ideologies. We see you attempt to shatter the foundations of society, preparing it for its subjugation to your biodigital technocracy, the very fulcrum of your 21st century totalitarian ambitions. We see you in the Irish government's continued participation in a globalist enterprise for which it has no mandate from the Irish people. A people who fought long and hard to repel the grip of empire, to which we have no intention of capitulating, no matter how it disguises itself. WHO pandemic agreement, Agenda 2030 with its sustainable development goals, and the EU migration pact. We see you in the moves to bring representative democracy to an end, replacing it with stakeholder capitalism. This is a model of centralized anti-democratic global governance advanced by the unelected World Economic Forum, which craves fusing state power, NGOs and corporate power to the growing power of these unaccountable and unelected supranational institutions like the WHO and the UN. We see you. We see the Irish government cheerleading on the WHO while operating a hidden shadow programme for government, which is largely founded on policies originating from these globalist institutions and whose impact is destroying social cohesion and stripping the Irish people of their rights, freedoms and sovereignty. We see the perverse influence of the World Economic Forum in Irish affairs and in Irish leadership. We call on the next government to prohibit membership of the WEF by cabinet members and by senior civil servants and by members of our diplomatic corps, and to openly declare the state's opposition to that organisation's neo-Malthusian depopulation agenda, which traces back to an economic philosophy that underpinned the vast human catastrophe and depopulation of Ireland in the 1840s. We see the continued use by this fading government of disingenuous language and rhetoric to support globalist policies to an unsuspecting public under patently false pretext of safety, compassion, international obligation and climate change. We see the Irish government's failure to address critical aspects of the pandemic response, including vaccine disabilities, harms and excess deaths. The lack of any meaningful investigation into the crisis betrays a fundamental disrespect for the Irish people, who shoulder the burden of your policies while you demonstrate an intolerable lack of accountability on your part. We demand an immediate, independent, transparent, criminal investigation into the vaccines and into the handling of the pandemic response.
Yes, yes, murder!
Encompassing all clinical aspects, including the legitimacy of using uber-magnified PCR tests. We demand fulsome disclosures of all communication with third-party institutions, especially with personnel connected with the WHO, the Wellcome Trust, Imperial College London, the European Medicines Agency and the European Centre for Disease Prevention and Control. We call on the new political establishment now gathering in the wings to enshrine the Nuremberg Code into Irish law. And in doing so, to fight any resistance, recognising that this resistance can only have one objective: to cover up potential crimes. Finally, to the globalists here and the globalists everywhere, we say, we see you. We see among you the ambition to become transhuman beings, and an intention to convince us that we are not of spirit and we are not of soul, that we are not of God. We most of all reject this dark impulse in its entirety. We see contriving through it a malevolence that is not and will never be in us. Under God, we sign this declaration. I'm not going to sign the declaration. I'm going to hand one in at the gate, and I would, if you feel you wish to sign it, please do with plenty of pens. It's just here behind me on a 3x4. Thank you very much for coming along.